Good morning. About to start the 14th, continuing with the 14th chapter. The name of the chapter is Shmoina Shotzim is the name of the chapter, and we are holding in page 111. Good morning, Pinchas. Good morning, David. So let's start from the top. Hakol Moedim, everyone agrees. B'mechametz if one processes 11 mincha after another, he does it one after the other, meaning somebody already had processed that 11 mincha and he's processing it again. Shu chayav, he's liable. Why? Because it says, it should not be baked leavened. Except the 2 loaves of bread of Shavuos, most of the other menachos, the other flour offerings, those other ingredients, but the main, the dominating ingredient was flour. They were not allowed to be made with chametz. So if he does bake them with chametz, he's liable, he's chayav. He's liable to what? It says in number 2, a mincha is a temple offering whose primary ingredient is flour, either it's raw form or baked or fried cake. Those menachos which are offered on the altar, all menachos except for the shtial lechem, the lechem of the loaves of Shavuos, which is called the Torah bread, may not be leavened, may not be chametz. One who deliberately causes the mincha to be leavened or parsley is liable to malchus, liable to lashes. Okay, so the mesoros sachar mesoros. Also, we spoke about castration the other day. So over here, the Gemara says everyone agrees that if one castrates a person after another has already castrated him, meaning he does a double castration, shu chayav is liable. So there's 2 people. Even though it was already done, the second person is liable also. Why? Shenema umoch v'chosus v'nosuk v'chos. It says in the Torah about someone that has an issue with his system. It says squeezed, crushed, detached, or cut. You shall not do this. If one is liable for testicles that are cut, does it not follow that one should then be liable all more so for testicles that are detached? Why then does the Torah need to add the word detached? That if one does one who detaches even after a guy who cuts them is liable. So this shows that it is biblically prohibited to perform an act that would cause castration in a healthy person, even on someone already castrated. Accordingly, even someone who is already castrated may not drink a potion that causes sterility. The original problem is thus reinstated. How can the Mishnah imply that such a potion is permitted on a weekday? Rather, the reference is to an old man who can no longer father children. He is allowed to drink a potion that causes sterility. So then you ask, well, what's the benefit of it? If he's not concerned with, having more children, he cannot father more children. So why does he need to drink the potion? So we can answer that maybe for other benefit, other type of benefits he's using it. So it was this very treatment that returned me to the potency of my youth. This proves that even an old man is capable of reproduction. Therefore, he too may not drink a potion that causes sterility. What caused the Rabbi Yochanan what returned his potency. So it says in 13, the Gemara in Gittin records a cure for impotency. Rabbi Yochanan reported that this remedy was effective in healing the impotency he suffered as a result of old age. Since an old man can easily become potent again, the prohibition of castration applies even to him. So if you want to, if you have an issue of impotency, look at the Gemara in Gittin 70a. The Gemara records a cure for impotency. And Rabbi Yochanan is testifying that it worked for him. Okay, so the Gemara says Ela Beisha. Rather, the reference is to a woman. There's no prohibition against castrating a woman. Rashba see the Tanoic dispute on this issue stated by Keren Or. Okay, there's a lot of discussion on this concept, but it's obviously woman is not obligated to procreate because the pasuk says "Pru revu," be fruitful and multiply. Umilu esoretz v'chivshuo, fill the earth and conquer it. Genesis 1:28. One would expect the word v'chivshua and conquer it to be spelled v'chavshua, the imperative to teach that only the man whose practice is to conquer in battle is commanded to be fruitful and multiply. So a woman is really helping out the men. It's not that she is obligated to have children. The mitzvah to have children is on the men, not on the woman. So maybe she's allowed to be castrated. Rabbi Yochanan Brokadoma al Shneim, regarding both of them, actually it says in regards to Adam and Eve that Hashem says to them, Vayevorech oisom elikim, God blesses them, and Vayemer lohem elikim puruvu, and God says to Adam and Eve, puruvu, you should be fruitful and multiply. So from this we see that both are obligated. What is there to say? The Tana holds that a woman is also commanded to procreate. Even a woman should be forbidden to drink a potion that causes sterility. So the Gemara says, Bezakena, we're dealing with an elderly woman. According to this Tana, the reference is to an old woman who can no longer bear children. Inam Ba'akor. Alternatively, the reference is to a barren woman, and these ladies are allowed to drink the potion of sterility, probably for other benefits that it would bring. Going into the Mishnah of 111a2, a Choshesh B'Shino, the Mishnah continues to discuss the rabbinic prohibition of medical treatment on the Shabbos. A Choshesh B'Shino, one who feels pain in his teeth, lo yigma boen es hachometz, may not sip vinegar through them. Ela metabalu kedarko, however, he may dip food into vinegar in his usual manner. Now again, this is for medicinal purposes. Or metabal kedarko, he may dip food into vinegar in his usual manner. Ve'im nisrapo, and if he thereby cured, nisrapo, he is cured, meaning it's indirectly taking care of his teeth. Choishesh b'mos, the one who feels pain in his loins, lo yosuch yain v'chometz, may not smear them with wine or vinegar. Aval sachu is hashemen, however, he may smear them with oil. So he's not allowed to, according to the Mishnah, he's not allowed to smear his loins with wine and vinegar, but he's allowed to do it with oil. V'lo shemen vered, but not rose oil. Bnei meloch sochin shemen vered lamakisem. Princes may smear rose oil on their wounds. Sheken darkon losuch b'choil, for such is their custom to smear rose oil on their bodies even on weekdays. So it's not per se for medicinal purposes. Rabbi Shimon Eimer, a dissenting view, Kol Yisrael b'nei melochim, according to Rabbi Shimon, all Israel, all Jews are princes, like princes, and Jew may apply rose oil to his wounds on the Shabbos. Going to the Gemara, Ramele Rav Ocho, Aricho Daur Rav Acha Bar Papa Rav Abar. The tall Rav Acha, who is Rav Acha Bar Papa, pointed out the following contradiction to Rabbi Abau. Tanan. We learned in the Mishnah, Choshesh b'shino, one who feels pain in his teeth, lo yigma b'en sachemetz, may not sip vinegar through them. This seems to indicate that vinegar is good for the teeth. But it is written to the contrary. It's written in Proverbs 10:26, like vinegar to the teeth, meaning that it's harming to the teeth, and like smoke to the eyes. So is a lazy person to those who send them. That's the continuation of the verse. So Gemara says, because this, the pasuk, like vinegar to the teeth, refers to the acrid or acrid, not sure what's the spelling of this, pronunciation of this word, acrid juice of unripe fruit. It says in 27, the wine of immature grapes is harmful to the teeth. The pasuk describes it as chometz, vinegar, because it too, as an acrid product of the grape. Whereas this, our Mishnah, refers to vinegar. So when is it damaging to the teeth? When it's fruit that is not yet ready, unripe fruit. Then it's type of vinegar that is harming to the teeth. But real vinegar is beneficial for the teeth. And if you wish, answer you can say that both this and that, the pasuk and the Mishnah, refers to vinegar, and yet there is no contradiction between them. This, the Mishnah speaks of a case where there is a wound, and therefore it's beneficial. When there is no wound, where the pasuk refers to a case where there is no wound, and then it's harmful. Say, where there is a wound, vinegar heals the teeth. Where there is no wound, vinegar loosens the teeth. So it's not good to use vinegar, according to this, when there is no wound, because it's going to loosen the teeth. What they call in the professional language, maybe gum recession, could lead to gum recession. It's one who feels pain in his teeth, may not sip vinegar through them. One may not sip vinegar to relieve a toothache on Shabbos and then spit it out, because it would be obvious that he is doing so for therapeutic reasons. However, he may sip the vinegar and swallow it, because people sometimes sip and swallow vinegar, even for non-medicinal purposes. The Baisa contradicts our Mishnah, which implies that sipping vinegar for a toothache is forbidden, even if one swallows the vinegar. Over here it says that he's allowed to do it. Our Mishnah too, when it teaches that sipping vinegar is prohibited, it speaks about a case when someone sips and spits out the vinegar. But if he swallows the vinegar, it is permitted, as the Baita stated. You can even say that our Mishnah prohibits sipping and swallowing, and still it does not contradict the Baita, because the Mishnah and Baisa are referring to different circumstances. Kan lifnei tibul, kan la'achar tibul. Here in the Baisa, the reference is to one who sips and swallows vinegar before dipping, before a meal. Kan la'achar tibul, whereas here the Mishnah, the reference is to one who does so after dipping, after a meal. The Gemara, however, notes that this contradicts a different statement by Rabbah. V'neima midilifnei tibul shrei. But let him say that since it is permitted to swallow vinegar before dipping, before a meal, la'achar tibul nami shrei, it must also be permitted after dipping, after a meal. The Shamina le Rava deit le'oil, for we have heard that Rava holds of the principle of since The Amar Rava, what is the principle of sins? The Amar Rava, because Rava said, Lei kamidid of Shabbos shori. There is nothing pertaining to melacha that is permitted on the Shabbos. Uviyem Kippurim also, and prohibited on Yom Kippur. Oil the Shabbos shirei. Rather, we say that since it is permitted on the Shabbos, Yom Kippur unam shirei, it is permitted on Yom Kippur as well. Therefore, here too, Rava should rule that since swallowing vinegar is permitted before a meal, it should be permitted after a meal as well. Let's see what is it says in number 33, the principle of sins would dictate that there is no act which is forbidden for one part of the Shabbos and permitted for another part. If it's permitted, it's permitted all the way, and if it's forbidden, it's forbidden all the way. There's no act which is forbidden for one part of the Shabbos and permitted for another part. So the Gemara concedes that Rava's two statements are contradictory. Hodar be'Rava me'ach, upon adopting the principle of sins, there's no halfway. Rava retracted that answer with which he reconciled the rulings of the Mishnah and Brisa regarding sipping vinegar on the Shabbos. At first, it says in 34, at first Rava resolved the contradiction between the Mishnah and the Brisa by differentiating between swallowing vinegar before a meal and doing so after a meal. But when he subsequently adopted the principle of sins, he had to retract that solution. Instead, he reconciled the Mishnah and Brisa as Abaye did by asserting that the Mishnah forbids only swallowing and spitting out. But if you swallow vinegar and if you put vinegar in your mouth and then swallow it, you're allowed to do so. So, from what is it evident that he retracted that ruling about vinegar, which disregarded the principle of sins? Dilma ma'iyod, but perhaps he retracted the statement in which he ruled that immersion is permitted on Yom Kippur, since it is permitted on the Shabbos. It says in 35, perhaps Rava first stated principle of sins at a later date. He first stated the principle of sins. At a later date, he reconciled our Mishnah and the Brisa by distinguishing between before and after a meal, showing that he had subsequently retracted that principle. If, as suggested here, Rava did indeed retract the principle of sins, he would rule that immersion is forbidden on Yom Kippur. The Gemara says, Lo yisarko daito. It should not enter your mind that Rava retracted his statement regarding immersion and prohibited it on Yom Kippur. Why? The Tanya, it was taught in a Baita. Kol chayav tefillah storin kedakum. All those requiring immersion, neither a woman who has given birth, ben b'Tisha B'av, ben Yom Kippur, both on Tisha B'av and on Yom Kippur. It's just important to say, it should be noted that the Brisa permits to immerse oneself in Yom Kippur and Tisha B'av does not apply nowadays. See it, Eirachaim 5548, 613:12, and Tosfos Tubeitza also Dibur Matchikol tells us that this does not apply to nowadays, and even if dealing with Nida and a woman who is giving birth, she is not allowed to go to the mikvah on Yom Kippur. The second part of the Mishnah, one who feels pain in his loins may smear rose oil on his wounds on the Shabbos, but is not allowed to smear wine and vinegar, as we learned in the Mishnah. The law follows the view of Rabbi Shimon, who says that all, because we said you're allowed to smear with oil, but not rose oil. Then comes Rabbi Shimon and he says rose oil is allowed to. No, the Mishnah tells us rose oil is allowed to princes, but not to everyone else. Comes Rabbi Shimon and says all Jews are princes, are bnei melochim, the sons of the kings, and therefore everyone is allowed to use rose oil on Shabbos for a loin's wound. The Rav Rabbi Shimon severe alei. This seems to indicate that Rav agrees with all the lenient rulings of Rabbi Shimon regarding the Shabbos. Because Rav just says Alocha ke Rabbi Shimon, so we want to say that Rav follows all the lenient ruling of Rabbi Shimon. This stopper of a barrel, a cloth wrapped around the faucet of an earthenware barrel, which served to seal any gaps between the faucet and the barrel. Also, la'aduke b'yemotov. One is forbidden to push it into place. You're not allowed to adjust it, push it into place on Yom Tov. B'yemotov on Yom Tov is not allowed to do it. Obviously, on Shabbos, certainly it would be forbidden to do so. This is a case of unintended melacha, which Rabbi Shimon permits. Rabbi Shimon is lenient about it. Rav, who forbids this act, evidently does not agree with all of Rabbi Shimon's lenient rulings concerning the Shabbos. Ba'i afilu Rabbi Shimon, in that case, inserting a plug into a barrel, even Rabbi Shimon would agree that it is forbidden. Abai and Rava both said, Rabbi Shimon agrees that an act is forbidden where its forbidden consequence is inevitable. Like the famous example of psik reisha, if you cut an animal's head, you can't say, I didn't mean to kill it, I just wanted to cut the head. It's psik reisha. If you're going to plug the barrel, you're going to squeeze this cloth into the hole, and you definitely do squeezing. It's inevitable that you will squeeze the cloth. Inevitable that some wine will be squeezed from it, some wine will be squeezed from the cloth. Since even Rabbi Shimon would agree that this is forbidden, there is no contradiction between Rav's ruling here and Rabbi Shimon's position. It says even Rabbi Shimon would agree that it's psik reisha, that it's inevitable and it should be forbidden. The Gemara, however, now cites incontestable evidence that Rav does not follow Rabbi Shimon. The law follows Rabbi Yehuda, who prohibits an action which is unintentionally accomplishes a melacha. Rav Chanan bar Ami Omar Shmuel, and Rav Chanan bar Ami said in the name of Shmuel that halacha ki Rabbi Shimon, the law follows Rabbi Shimon, who permits such action. Rabbi Chia bar Avin Masnen Labeloi Gavre, and Rabbi Chia bar Avin taught the above dispute between Rav and Shmuel without others, as follows: Rav amar halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda. Rav said that the law follows Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel amar halacha ki Rabbi Shimon, and Shmuel says that the law follows Rabbi Shimon. Here, so it is stated explicitly. Here it is stated explicitly that Rav does not follow Rabbi Shimon regarding an unintended melacha. Therefore, how can we explain the fact that Rav adopts Rabbi Shimon's ruling regarding rose oil? So, meaning you're following him halfway. Rav is following Rabbi Shimon halfway. I and the line of the group interpreted Rav's statement regarding rose oil so that it would not contradict his other statement, Umanu. And who is this person described as the lion of the group? Rabbi Chia bar Avin was the lion of the group. Rav meant that the law follows Rabbi Shimon, but not for his reason that all Jews are b'nei Melochim, the son of kings. All Jews are princes. Rose oil is permitted, but not for the reason said by Rabbi Shimon. Thus, Rav does not actually follow Rabbi Shimon's opinion on this matter. What is the meaning? The law follows Rabbi Shimon, but not for his reason. Perhaps it means that the law follows Rabbi Shimon, who permits the use of rose oil, but not for this reason. Because Rabbi Shimon maintains that it heals. Rose oil has medicinal benefits. But Rav maintains that it does not heal, and that's why it's permitted. But really, Rav maintains that it does not heal. But that cannot be correct. For since the Mishnah teaches, it says clearly that princes may smear rose oil on their wounds. Miklal demase, it is evident that rose oil does heal. Ella, rather, the meaning of Rav's statement is as follows: Alocha ki Rabbi Shimon deshori, the law follows Rabbi Shimon, who permits the use of rose oil. Velav mitamei, not for his reason. Deilu Rabbi Shimon sovar af al gav lo yishachiach sherei, because Rabbi Shimon holds that rose oil is permitted, even though it is not common. Rav Sova, and Rav holds ein shachiach, and if it is common, yes, it may be used. Lo shachiach lo, but if it's not common, no, it may not be used for this loins pain or loins wounds. Uva'asoro de Rav shchiach mishcho de vardo. In Rav's locale, rose oil was common. So we'll look at number 12. It says Rav follows the Tanakama's opinion that commoners may not use rose oil on Shabbos because they use it only for healing. However, even the Tanakama agrees that in a locale where when commoners use rose oil for non-healing purposes, they may smear it on their wounds, since its use is not clearly medicinal. Rav permits to use rose oil applied to such a locale, and therefore is consistent with the Tanakama's view. Adron Aloch Shmoina Shrotzim will return to you, chapter 14, Shmoina Shrotzim. And with that, we're going to chapter 15. We're going to speak about knots. Tying a knot. Tying and untying knots are two of the obvious meloches, our primary labors, prohibited on the Shabbos. The Mishnah discusses the status of various knots. And these are the knots for which one is liable. The camel driver's knot and the sailor's knot. These are craftsman knots, professional knots. So we have so far two of them that are forbidden: the sailors and the camel drivers. And just as one is liable for tying them, so is one liable for untying them. Rabbi Menashe Amitay, any knot that one can untie with one of his hands, and chayavim, all of one is not liable for it. If you can do it with one hand, according to Rabbi Meir, if you can untie it with one hand, according to Rabbi Meir, you are not liable. So far, if we're summarizing the Mishnah, we learned that all knots that one would be liable is the knot of camel drivers and knot of sailors, and the same way that you're liable for tying them, you're liable for untying them. And Rabbi Meir said, if you can do it with one hand, you're not liable. So first of all, let's figure out, the Gemara is trying to figure out what is a knot, a camel's knot, camel's driver's knot, and what is sailor's knot. What case the Mishnah mean by the terms the camel driver's knot and the sailor's knot? If you say it means the knot that is tied through the nose ring, the knot connecting the leash to the nose ring. guess the camels have a nose ring, so there was a knot that goes into that ring. So are you referring to that knot the Gemara is asking? If you say it means the knot that is tied through the nose ring, the knot connecting the leash to the nose ring, and the knot that is tied through the ship's ring, the knot connecting the anchoring rope to the ship's ring. This is an impermanent knot. It's not a permanent knot. It's a knot that made to be open, and thus no liability should be incurred for tying it. Rather, the Mishnah means the knot of the nose ring itself, the knot by which the thong is formed into the nose ring. Udestrida gufa, and the knot of the ship's ring itself, the knot by which the thong is formed into the ship's ring, both of which are permanent knots. And for permanent knots, someone would be liable. Rabbi Meir called kasher. Rabbi Meir says, any knot that one can untie with one hand, one is not liable for it. By Rav Chadvoi Achui de Mar Acha, Rav Chadvoi, the brother of Mar Acha, inquired, Aniva Rabbi Meir Mar, what is the status of a bow according to Rabbi Meir? Tamid Rabbi Meir mishum deyochel atir be'achas miyodahu. Is Rabbi Meir's reason in ruling that he did because one can untie the knot with one of his hand. Vainami yochel atiroi. And thus this knot, too, a bow, since it can be untied with one hand, should also not incur liability. Or Dilma, or perhaps, Talmud Rabbi Meir mishum deloi miadak, is the reason of Rabbi Meir because a knot that can be untied with one hand is not tight. Vehamiadak, and this knot too, a bow, although it can be untied with one hand, is tight. The Gemara ends off, it would entail liability, question mark, the Gemara ends off with teiku, let the question stand unresolved. So when it comes to a bow, it is a question whether someone would incur liability for untying it and tying it. Going to the Mishnah in the bottom of 111b2. There are knots for which one is not liable, as for the camel driver's knot and the sailor's knot. What is it? So we just said before that camel's knot and sailor's knot, someone would be liable for it. But this Mishnah tells you that there are knots for which one is not liable, as for the camel driver's knot and the sailor's knot. What is it? Kusheres isho mafteach haluko. It says in number 6 in the notes, one is not liable to a chatos for tying these knots, for a sin offering, for tying these knots. They are, however, rabbinically forbidden. The Gemara will explain which knots these are. A woman may tie the opening of her apron. We're using a word, I'm not sure what it is. Chemais. It says in 7, the garment is open in the front and has 2 straps extending from the top of each corner. The right strap was tied over the left shoulder, and the left strap over the right shoulder, thereby closing the garment. Since this knot is made to be tied and untied the very same day, it bears no resemblance to the biblically prohibited permanent knot and is permitted to be tied on the Shabbos. So, v'chutei sevacha, another thing is strings of a hat, v'shel psikayo, or of a girdle, uretzuos minol v'sandal, straps of a shoe or sandal, V'noidos yain v'shemen, leather canteens of wine or oil, ukedero shel boso, or a pot of a meat. A piece of cloth, what does it mean? Or a pot of meat. So he tells us, number 11, a piece of cloth is sometimes tied over the top of a pot in place of a lid. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov, 111b3, Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov Omer, one may tie a rope in front of the stall of an animal so that it not go out on Shabbos. Let's see the Gemara. Gufa kashyo. This is inherently contradictory. There are knots. You said there are knots for which one is not liable, as for the camel driver's knots and the sailor's knot. There is no liability, but it is forbidden. But there is nonetheless a rabbinical prohibition. But then, in the very next line, the Tana teaches a woman may tie the opening of her apron, which indicates that this is permissible even from the start. So is it something that is permitted or it's something that is forbidden? This is what the Mishnah is saying. This is what the Mishnah is saying. There are knots for which one is not liable, as for the camel driver's knots and the sailor's knot. Umayni, and what type of knots are there that you're not liable? Page 112a1, it says kitro de kotre bezmamo. They are the knot which is tied through the nose ring. V'kitra the kotre beisterido, and the knot which is tied through the sheep's ring. Chiyuva udeleika isuraika. It's chiyuva, meaning there is no biblical liability, but there is a rabbinical prohibition. V'yesh mutor lechatchila, and there are some knots that are permissible even initially. Umayniu, and what are they? Kosheres mifteche chalukah. A woman may tie the opening of her apron. It says in number 4, the Mishnah is thus understood to be missing critical phrase chasur mechasro. It should actually read, all these are knots which are permissible from the outset. A woman may tie the opening of her chimais or apron. We'll continue, God willing, tomorrow. Thank you all for watching.